are.
I heard failure. And the word heard. I heard exactly
I will
what you
tell
said.
you how I use the word
exactly
failure,
what you
because
said.
I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership.
A United States Senator just told the Secretary of Defense, directly under oath on the record, that he is the failure, not the troops, not the mission. The man sitting across from him who has been running this war, defending its progress, and asking for billions more to continue it. Senator Gary Peters of Michigan has been raising alarms about the administration's Iran war strategy for months. What he brought to this hearing wasn't opinion. It was a documented catalog of every time the president said the war was over, and then it wasn't. Build that record all the way to July 21st, 2025, and the answer to how many times becomes impossible to ignore.
I want to begin by first echoing my colleagues' comments that we've heard throughout the hearing here, and join them in mourning the loss of American service members who were killed in action these last few days. My thoughts are with their families, with a service member who remains missing, and with all those injured during the strikes.
Senator Gary Peters of Michigan has served on the Senate Armed Services Committee since 2015. He is a Navy veteran, a former securities regulator, and a senator from a state with one of the highest concentrations of active duty military families in the country. When he opens his questioning with condolences for service members killed in the last few days, he is not being rhetorical. He is setting the frame for everything that follows. Because the central argument of his 5 minutes in this hearing is not political. It is factual. On July 21st, 2025, the day of this hearing, American service members killed in recent strikes were being prepared for return to their families. The Secretary of Defense was sitting in front of the Senate asking for $70 billion more to continue the effort. And the president who authorized that effort had described it, in verified, documented public statements, as essentially complete more than 30 times. Peters was about to read that list aloud.
It doesn't help that you and your president continues to mislead the American people. You and the president have repeatedly said that the war, as we've heard over and over again, is almost over or already won. In fact, the president alone has said the war is almost over more than 30 times. On March 1st, the president said, we'll be done in 4 or 5 weeks. On March 9th, he said the war was very complete. On April 8th, he declared total and complete victory, 100%, no question about it. On the same day, you declared Operation Epic Fury was a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield, a capital V military victory by any measure. And yet today, July 21st, we have soldiers whose remains are sadly going to be returned to their deeply grieving families tomorrow. Clearly, the war is not over yet.
30 times. That number is the spine of this entire exchange. The President of the United States told the American public that the Iran war was nearly over, or already concluded more than 30 documented separate occasions. Peters names 3 of them specifically. March 1st, done in 4 or 5 weeks. March 9th, the war was very complete. April 8th, total and complete victory, 100%. No question about it. And on that same April 8th, the Secretary of Defense declared Operation Epic Fury a capital V military victory by any measure. None of those statements were predictions or optimistic projections framed with qualifications. They were declarative, present tense, done, won, complete. Each was made before cameras, in front of reporters, into the official public record, and none of them held. The war continued after March 1st, after March 9th, after April 8th. The missiles kept coming. The Strait of Hormuz stayed closed. The casualties continued. Peters is not making a philosophical argument about the nature of war or the difficulty of military operations. He is reading back to the Secretary exactly what the Secretary and his President told the country, and showing, date by date, that the words did not match the reality. That gap, measured across more than 30 statements over 4 months, is the evidentiary foundation for everything else he is about to place on the record.
Secretary Hegseth, despite your failure to win this war, you are back now before Congress asking for almost $70 billion in additional funding. You're asking the American people for a blank check because, once again, the Trump administration's efforts have been an utter and complete failure to win this war to this point.
$70 billion, on top of whatever has already been spent, after a Secretary of Defense declared a Capital V military victory, after a president said the war was complete 30-plus times. Now the same team is back before the Senate Armed Services Committee, asking for a blank check to continue the operation they have already described as won. Peters' framing here is deliberate. He is not opposed to funding the military. He says explicitly, elsewhere in this hearing, that American service members can execute any mission and prevail in any battle. What he is opposing is the absence of accountability that comes with issuing a $70 billion check to a team that has repeatedly told the public the work was done and been wrong every time.
You mentioned nuclear material is the primary goal of the war. It still exists. We haven't dealt with that issue yet. You talk about the destruction of missiles, and yet the missiles that we saw hit recent targets are actually somehow more lethal, more deadly, more maneuverable than what we have seen in the past. So they're obviously improving their munitions. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, reminding everybody it was open before the war. Prices were lower for everybody until the war, and it still remains closed. And of course, tragically, people, service members, our warfighters, who we care deeply about, are still dying. So what's different?
4 goals, 4 failures. Peters lines them up with the methodical precision of a senator who has been tracking this war from its beginning and refusing to accept the administration's framing at face value. He does not editorialize, he lists. Nuclear material, the administration's own stated primary objective for the entire operation, still exists and remains unsecured. That is the core justification for starting the conflict, still unachieved. Iranian missiles, instead of being degraded into military irrelevance through the strikes, have evolved. The weapons hitting targets now are described by Peters as more lethal, more deadly, and more maneuverable than what Iran possessed at the outset. The military campaign against Iranian missile infrastructure appears to have accelerated Iranian weapons development rather than stopped it. The Strait of Hormuz, the waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply moves, was open before this war began and remains closed throughout. American consumers are paying higher prices at the pump. Global energy markets are disrupted. The economic cost of that closure accumulates every day. And American service members, whose courage, dedication, and sacrifice Peters explicitly acknowledges multiple times, are still dying. Not in the final stages of a concluding campaign, still dying. So, what's different is the question that carries all 4 of those items simultaneously. Hegseth's answer did not address any of them.
I think your characterization of this incredible effort as a failure is reckless. And I think it's irresponsible. And I think it smears the sacrifice of the troops that are out there making on behalf of the American people to ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. Shame on you and others who call this a quagmire and a failure, and then you want to turn around and say you support the warfighter. Either you do or you don't.
Shame on you. That is the Secretary of Defense responding to a United States Senator who just read a documented, time-stamped, publicly verifiable list of 30-plus presidential statements that turned out to be factually wrong. Hegseth's argument is the one the administration has deployed consistently throughout this conflict. To criticize the conduct of the war is to fail to support the troops. That framing collapses a crucial distinction, the distinction between the men and women executing the mission and the civilian leadership directing it. Peters had made that distinction explicit and deliberate. He said plainly that he has no doubt American service members can execute any mission and prevail in any battle. He said it twice in this exchange. His challenge was not to the troops, it was to the strategy, the public statements, and the accountability of the civilian leadership running an operation they had declared won multiple times while people kept dying. Hegseth's "shame on you" declines to engage with any of that. Peters' answer was the one that stayed on the record.
Fighters are.
I heard failure. And the word heard, I heard exactly
I will
what you
tell
said.
you how I use the
Heard
word
exactly
failure,
what you
because
said.
I use the word failure to their leaders. You, sir, are the failure, not the men and women who are on that front line, not the men and women who hold up their honor with distinction. But if there's a lack of a winning strategy, they're in harm's way. Their leaders have failed them. And that's what's happening. We have political leadership. You,
sir, are the failure. Peters makes the same distinction Hegseth refused to make. He separates the troops from their leadership and assigns the failure specifically and by name to the man sitting across from him. The failure is not the service members. The failure is not the mission. The failure is the leadership that deployed them without a winning strategy, repeatedly told the public the job was done, and is now asking for $70 billion more, with no clearer path to victory than what existed before the first dollar was spent. That verdict, delivered directly on the record in a Senate hearing, is what the title of this video is built on.
Department because you have Trump derangement syndrome and can't actually commit to anything meaningful. So I put this on you, Senator.
Secretary Hegseth, you have trillions, you have over $1 trillion. You're asking for $1.5 trillion. It's not a question of money. It's a question of leadership and understanding what it takes to actually win.
Senator's time has expired.
Trump derangement syndrome. That is where the Secretary of Defense lands after the 4-item accountability list, after the 30 documented statements, after the soldiers whose remains were returning home the next morning. The phrase is not a counter-argument. It is a dismissal. The assertion that Peters' concerns are driven by irrational opposition to the president rather than by the documented record Peters just read into the congressional transcript. Peters' final answer cuts through it in 2 sentences. This is not a question of money. The department has $1 trillion. They are asking for $1.5 trillion. What they do not have is leadership that can explain what winning looks like, how to achieve it, or why anything about the approach will produce a different result than what the last 4 months produced. The chair ended the exchange with the standard procedural call. The record didn't end. What Peters built in 5 minutes of hearing time, the 30 statements, the 4 failures, the soldiers returning home the next morning, the $70 billion blank check, and the direct on-record verdict on the man responsible, stays in the transcript whether the senator's time has expired or not. What would you have asked him?